Hey, so this is something I worked on. I didn't see your later PowerPoint in which you've made some changes, but I think my comments are consistent even with the more recent model. So in general, I'm really fine with this piece right here. That's sort of the latent growth curve piece. I think that makes perfect sense. So there are a couple things that I there are several things I don't quite understand and that's okay with me. Um, this is, is your model. Um, but I don't quite understand these relationships that are indicated here. Um, Unless this symptom trajectory, I don't know how that's different than here, unless, well, here. I also don't understand the relationships that are here. So so it seems like you have time varying covariates, and I don't quite get those. But here's what. So I've marked with asterisks as things I don't quite understand. Um, here are a couple things that I think could be added and may indicate this may be the same as what you're having here as symptom trajectory. So in the one of the objectives, I talk about the objectives of longitudinal research. I talk about the interrelationships between um, correlates of inter-individual change. And so that would be nice to see some way to model that these symptoms, slopes and intercepts, could be correlated, so arrows between them. And that would be one thing. A second thing would be that these symptoms could individually predict distal outcomes. So you may have an outcome that could be really wide-ranging. It could be relapse. It could be a survival analysis, actually. Uh, or it could be just long-term quality of life, like 5-year quality of life, whatever. And there could be either a set of arrows coming from each of these symptoms. It gets pretty busy when you do that. Or something like you have here, symptom trajectory, and I think that trajectory could predict outcomes. So in other words, if somebody has a really steep recovery slope in their symptoms, that could lead to failure to relapse. That could be survival, or it could be long-term quality of life, something like that. Now, so I think that's something that's not there, unless you have it up here with the symptom trajectories. Something that we haven't discussed at all, but I think would be an addition to the model, would be this idea of a growth mixture model, where you may be able to define relatively homogeneous subgroups of individuals based on their slopes and their intercepts. So in other words, you could think that you have people who may start very high with symptoms, like their intercepts are high, and they maintain, that is, their slopes are flat. Or you may have groups of people who have high symptoms to begin with, but they show negative slopes, that is, they get better quickly. You may have individuals, and you can think about all kinds of permutations. So those would be captured into a cluster membership, and that cluster membership would have a profile. So it's a latent profile analysis built on top of here. So we have categories of individuals. So individuals, for instance, and then I'll stop. The individuals who start high and show recovery, maybe that's a group of individuals that will have very positive distal outcomes. Their quality of life will be better than individuals who start high and stay high. In other words, they have a high intercept and flat or only gently declining slope, they would have, you would predict that they would have not so positive outcomes. Or if you could also build in just the a survival analysis, and I think you have that down here in survival. I'm not quite sure how that works. So you could have a group of people who show in a regression or like an ANOVA with, let's say you have 3 or 4 groups here in your cluster, that you would have differences across the clusters in long-term quality of life, return to work, whatever. And or in the same vein, you could have an idea that you have in a Cox hazard model. You could look at time to event, like time to relapse. If it was something that was that you were into palliative care, you could have something that is predictive of death or relapse, and that could fall into either individual predictors from the slopes and the intercepts, perhaps. Slopes would be more interesting. Or you could have cluster membership as predictive of survival using a Cox hazard survival analysis. So I think I'll be happy to chat with you. I see, of course, that you sent as an attachment this, which is fine. I think you've cleaned that up, but I don't quite understand these pathways that are in there. So this is very much the same. I think these are all great. I don't quite understand the arrows coming into these. That I'm not quite sure about those, but I'm not trying to interfere with the model. I think you have good reasons for how you've set this up. I'm just saying, if we're thinking about the latent growth model as a way to test these ideas, then I think we may end up with a rather difficult time to explain all these different things there. So anyway, and maybe anyway, so that's where I'm at. And again, I'll be happy to chat with you if you'd like.